In this, the 23rd lesson in the course A Critical History of Economic Theory and Policy, we examine the economic thinking and policies that govern some of the economic and societal experience of people around the world during the second half of the 20th century. As has been noted, at the end of the Second World War, the productive capacity of Britain, of France, of Germany, of Italy, and of Japan, and many other countries where the war was fought was greatly disrupted. Moreover, the sacrifices in life and property by so many millions of people raised expectations on the part of survivors that their governments would take more seriously the needs and concerns of all citizens and not return to policies that favored only landed interests and other very wealthy individuals and corporations. In Britain, this sentiment was eloquently expressed by the socialist writer Richard H. Tawney. Tawney had been a lecturer at the London School of Economics from 1917 to 1931, helping to establish the Economic History Society and serving as joint editor of its journal. He held the position of professor of economic history at LSE until his retirement in 1949. Among his many works was a book entitled Equality, first published in 1931. A revised fourth edition appeared in 1952, in which he wrote, "Approximately 3/4 of British families are dependent on one form or another of wage-earning employment. An individual born today in one of them will, as a result of the increased resources in money and services at the disposal of the lower income groups, be better nurtured than his predecessors. Have access to a schooling improved in quality and longer in duration, followed when compulsory attendance ceases by a widened range of educational and occupational opportunities, will be less exposed in manhood to loss of livelihood and status through involuntary unemployment, will not, as often hitherto, be deprived by lack of means of the treatment to illness required by himself or to his dependents. Will, if injured at work, receive benefit as a matter of course, instead of being compelled to struggle for compensation at the moment when his need is greatest and his resources least, and will be assured in unemployment, incapacity, and old age a less inadequate provision than in the past on terms compatible with his self-respect." From Richard Tawney's perspective, shared by those on the left politically, Britain was finally committing societal resources to true social democracy. The left also embraced the nationalization of natural resources as central to their goal of greater equality and bringing an end to poverty. One of the most influential figures in Britain during this experiment with the social welfare state was William Henry Beveridge. A report issued during 1942 under the direction of Beveridge made the case for a comprehensive system of social security and other measures carried into law by labor governments between 1945 and 1951. However, this chart indicates that for members of Parliament, even when Labour held the majority of votes, the issue of human rights did not begin to become a major concern until well into the 1960s. Outside of those societies dominated by the state socialism of the Soviet Union or China, or other outright dictatorships, the momentum was building for new societal compacts based on social democracy or democratic socialism. In the United States, the same momentum was embraced as liberalism. Whether motivated by humanitarian feelings or the fear of communist expansion into Western Europe, The United States stepped forward with assistance under the European Recovery Program in 1947. The driving force behind this program was U.S. General George C. Marshall. Between 1948 and 1952, over $13 billion in assistance was provided, assistance that included food, raw materials, and equipment. Then, in May of 1950, the French Foreign Minister, Robert Schuman, delivered a speech in which he proposed that all French and West German coal and steel production be transferred to a common authority. A treaty followed in 1951 that included Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, France, and West Germany, forming the European Coal and Steel Community. The same list of countries signed the Treaty of Rome in 1957, creating the new European Economic Community, which became known as the Common Market. The key policy element adopted by the EEC members was reduced or eliminated tariffs on trade within the community. An important outcome was the rapid consolidation of many industries in order to achieve productivity gains. For the French, the challenge of modernizing the French economy was enormous. French political economist Jean Monnet came forward with a bold plan. In his memoirs, he recalled, "When I had promised General de Gaulle in Washington that I would tackle the modernization of France, I had no idea how huge a task it would be. The French were buying abroad more than they sold." In an equilibrium as precarious as this, there was no hope of new capital investment. What capital was plowed back scarcely covered the replacement of antiquated machine tools, whose average life in France was 25 years, compared with 5 or 6 in the United States and 8 or 9 in Britain, where there were already twice as many as in France. Monnet was attempting to put into place the architecture of a form of capitalism described in the writings of Austrian-born economist Joseph Schumpeter. He migrated to the United States in 1932 and joined the economics faculty of Harvard University. In 1942, his most widely read book appeared, Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy. In this book, Schumpeter expresses agreement with Karl Marx that capitalism contains the seeds of its own destruction, that the success of capitalism would lead to corporatism. When a growing portion of a society's population that is highly educated cannot find meaningful and gainful employment, this will lead to a political shift to the left, to the establishment of worker cooperatives, industrial democracy, and restrictions on corporations. The phrase he used to describe this transitional process is creative destruction. Western Europe was entering a new reality. At the end of 1943, Jean Monnet spoke to his fellow Europeans. "Our countries have become too small for the present-day world, for the scale of modern technology and of America and Russia today, or China and India tomorrow. The union of European peoples in the United States of Europe is the way to raise their standard of living and preserve peace. It is the great hope and opportunity of our time." Economic policies in the newly independent but not yet developed countries were influenced by economists such as the Argentine Raul Prebisch. Prebisch's research suggested that no country could hope to significantly improve the standard of living of its people by the export of natural resources and other primary goods. Industrialization was the necessary ingredient. After his appointment as director of the Economic Commission for Latin America in 1948, he pressed for the adoption of policies that would lead to industrialization by reliance only on a country's domestic market. The challenge, of course, was creating sufficient high-wage jobs so that workers could afford to purchase what was manufactured. What Raul Prebisch and most other economists in developing nations failed to address in their research was the landlessness of the majority of people and the concentrated control over all aspects of their economies traced to the monopoly over land and natural resources. Where land is not available or available only at exorbitant prices, poverty is assured. Decent, affordable housing is absent, as is sanitation systems, clean water, electric power, schools, hospitals, and other community amenities. An exhaustive study of systems of land tenure in those countries that collect at least some revenue for public use from land values was published in 2000. The editor was Robert V. Andelson, not an economist by training, but a professor of philosophy at Auburn University. A chapter in the book by Sok Yong Feng, a professor at Singapore Management University, described the unique structure of law relating to land ownership in Hong Kong and Singapore. She wrote, "Hong Kong and Singapore are both densely populated cities. Land is a scarce resource, and land and property prices are high even when compared to prices in the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development countries, with the exception of Japan. Speculating or investing in the property market in both cities is indeed a favorite pastime of risk-loving locals and foreigners alike. The two cities are well known for being free traders as well as international financial centers with few restrictions on trade and capital flows, which are many times their GDP. However, what is less well known is the fact that the state owns all land in the case of Hong Kong and 4/5 of the land in the case of Singapore. Hong Kong and Singapore capture economic rent primarily by nationalizing land and leasing it out. A system of land tenure based on community or state ownership with private access and control based on leaseholds awarded under competitive bidding conditions is supported on economic efficiency grounds. This system is also consistent with the fundamental moral principle that access to the earth is our equal birthright. For many people on this planet, their reality is found in these words by Henry George. How can a man be said to have a country when he has not right of a square inch of it? Why this perspective escapes so many of the world's economists is perplexing. In his book, The Power in the Land, published in 1983, British political economist Fred Harrison offers an answer. He writes, "The major social and economic friction points derive their existence and logic from the need to compensate for land monopoly, the original structural defect in industrial society. Economists have always skirted around this issue and have thus been led by a variety of motives, some honorable, such as humanitarianism, some inspired by the need to protect vested interests, to propose solutions that have merely aggravated the problems. Of course, one of the great ironies in the history of economic theory is that political economists who embraced socialism, including Karl Marx, had a good appreciation of the problem with existing land tenure systems that permitted the private appropriation of the annual rental value of land. The principle appears as the first item of Section 2, Proletarians and Communists, in the Communist Manifesto, which reads, "Abolition of property in land and application of all rents of land to public purposes. Their great mistake was to embrace the wholesale nationalization of land, which was then allocated by bureaucratic central planning rather than by competition and market forces. Ideology displaced common sense and any understanding of what motivates most people to perform at their highest level. As Winston Churchill concluded, socialism is the philosophy of failure, the creed of ignorance, and the gospel of envy. To which Fidel Castro retorted, "They talk about the failure of socialism, but where is the success of capitalism in Africa, Asia, and Latin America?" The people of this planet continue to struggle under systems that reward those who merely claim some portion of what others produce. Economics professors have mostly clouded the issues cleared by political economy. And we've reached the end of Lesson 23.